he knows how to get the best out of them and motivate them the right way, and I think that's why he said what he said about Bateman not being nailed on.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But my overall kind of impression with his game, the questions I had before the game are still the questions I have. I don't think I don't know how much it will have helped Wayne, really. Maybe it did. Maybe it helped him with nines. Maybe.
I think if anything, it might have made things a bit more complicated, because some of the people who I thought should be nowhere near this squad, like Hall, like McAlorum, like Watkins, weren't shit. They weren't miles off. Like they didn't look behind the game. So I think if anything, it's probably given him a bit more food for thought about some of those older guys, and not necessarily giving him the chance of rule them out. I think there's probably only 2 or 3 players from this side that I think he knows are not in his final plans now.
Maybe.
We'll see. Yeah. But it was good for England to get a win, because they lost this game last year, so it's better than that stage. I think as a team, what they'll be really happy with is I thought support play was pretty decent. There was a lot of support runners being offered, not necessarily always getting used, not always maybe the right decision being made, but there's a lot of support players being offered, so that's a positive. And when the combis did break England, most of the time England got back and shut it down, and I think that's a huge positive. That shows that shows them working for each other, which you'd expect them to do in an England shirt, but sometimes you get players working for themselves and for their pride, for their country or what have you, or for their place in the side. It didn't feel like this. It felt like a group together, which was, I think, the biggest positives to take out of it was those aspects.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough.
Okay, final England game to cover was the Wheelchair International, and if we talked as much about the individual scores in this one as we did about the last game, then we'd be here all night. So we'll talk about some of the highlights of this one. But it was England 62, France 48. It was 34-23 at half-time, because France fought the way of overcoming a deficit was drop goals. Mr. Ball was the referee. I don't know what the crowd was, but there did look like a good few hundred people in the Manchester Basketball Centre for this one, so that was it seemed like they were really getting into it. What about the individual scorers on the day, Al?
Yep, so for England, Bashara with 2, King with 2, Halliwell with 2, Coyd with 2, and then further tries from Roberts, Collins and Hawkins, and the goal kicks, Collins with 6 and Roberts with 3. For France, Alazar with 3 tries, Gutadoro with 2, and then Dullahad and Dore. Goals, Alazard with 9, and then 2 drop goals from Dullahad and Gutadoro. All important 1 point.
Yeah, Matt Speakman said, my first time really watching any Wheelchair RL. I'll definitely be watching next time. Really great performance by England. The crowd were really into it, and France obviously played their part in a fantastic game. Yeah, thanks for getting in touch on this one, Matt. Tell you what, they did go ahead with a drop goal, so it did make me think, is there any spot betting going on here? Like they've got first points will be a France drop goal, so the bookies want to look into that. But positive for England, they lost the series to France at the back end of last year, and they've won this game. France were, we have to say, without the 2 Corsels, and who was that really big, tall, rangy bloke who scored, I think he scored 2 or 3 tries in that, he was good anyway in the series last year, and then he wasn't there as well. But there were some established guys in there as well. Let's not say that it was a poor France side. It's still a very good France side. It wasn't. There might be a different side at the World Cup, so we need to take the 14 points win, with a pinch of salt, but talk about it as progress all the same.
Yeah, I think both teams were like that. Obviously, James Simpson wasn't playing either, was he?
No, and they've got England. The guy who's in Australia to come back in as well. So that's 2 former Golden Boot winners, isn't it?
So, I mean, they're both slightly, mix and match teams, I think you would say. So yeah, I think the actual teams that start, because they're in separate groups, aren't they? So they won't be able to play until they get to the final stages. But yeah, I mean, my notes basically say odd tactics from the French team. It seemed like if they'd run out of ideas, it was let's kick a drop goal. Seemed to be the order of the day. But fundamentally, for me, the best element from England's point of view was how strong they were defensively. I thought they were very, very good in defence. It seems a bit hard saying that when they scored 48 points, but you know what I mean.
Oh yeah, but it's wheelchair. It's a different type of game.
And obviously there were 3 late scores that kind of that closed it up from France, weren't there? So it changed the complexion of the match a little bit, I think. But yeah, fundamentally, I think England did a lot of good things in this match. It felt very intense.
Yeah.
Very. I tell you what I thought, but there was a fair bit of niggle, just bits and pieces.
Oh yeah, there was a couple of times where I thought it was crossing the line a little bit with some of the challenges. That the ref was on top of it. Give them credit, but you're right. There were a couple of times where you thought that contact was a bit unnecessary.
Yeah, and there was a couple of bits of
from both sides.
Oh yeah, from both sides, and there was a couple of bits. I think England. I think it was their first try. They got away with a really blatant obstruction to kind of for I think who went through? Was it Roberts who went through the gap?
Yeah,
I think it was Roberts. But basically, one of the other England players had basically just blocked off one of the French defenders. Absolutely definite interference. But yeah, there was definitely bits and pieces of, because there was a lot of double tags taken off in this match, and
I thought England got better at some of those things. I think there was times in the series last year where England were rushing a bit sometimes, and they had a few times where they missed putting their own tags on because they weren't being composed whilst they were doing it. That only happened once in this game. There was a few times where they did the double tag thing, slowing the other team down and stuff. And I think in this game it wasn't because they couldn't cope with the speed. I think it was just because there was that element of aggro. But I get what you're saying. There was some scrappiness.
Yeah. It clearly was. Yes, they're. I think obviously some of these players who are fringe players potentially are obviously trying to force their way in, and I think that actually raised the level of the game in terms of the intensity, rather than it becoming, a glorified friendly. And yeah, for me, it was a fantastic thing to watch again. I feel like I say that every time, but it always seems to be, particularly when it's probably the best 2 teams.
Yeah, and one thing I do think is England played the better rugby in this game.
Yes, they did. 90% of the time they did. Yeah.
The Halliwell's second try, I think it was, the one where they nipped down the short side and then did the sort of offloads all the way back across the pitch to the other side, and basically England had 2 free men outside because of the speed of the play of the ball and stuff like that. I thought the speed of the play of the ball from England was a lot better in this game than I'd seen it last year. And obviously, like Seb Bashara, he's the linchpin of this. I think he was the only player for England that maybe was on the whole game. I
think
certainly till the last 10 minutes or so when it was done and dusted. Him and Halliwell maybe, but I thought they rotated the other players really well. Using Collins off the bench is a move that they've used before, and I think it's a smart move. I just thought everyone performed really well, and it'd be hard to take any of those sides out of the side when you get into the World Cup time.
Yeah, there's a lot of players who've kind of put themselves forward, I would say. One thing I did notice that I hadn't really picked up on before were how evasive the French were in terms of using their upper body to avoid having a tag taken.
Yeah.
Some of their players are very, very good at that.
They've got a few guys who are really rangy compared to our guys, like long limbs as well. They have a couple of big blokes that can kind of almost, you feel like, reach around where you are, and so they can move the body. And I don't know, it just seems like the physicality, which is weird when you're just trying to pull a tag off someone's shoulder, but their physicality means they can move a bit more. And
yeah, it sounds like a very easy thing to do, doesn't it? But it's not.
Yeah.
You can tell that because it's the way that they're able to kind of move their shoulders and kind of make the tags unavailable to a defender really is very smart, and that's not something I'd really picked up on in previous matches that I've seen. So that was kind of noticeable. I don't know what else to say really, other than Al-Azhar is very quick. The kind of kicks in behind, that's something we'll need to look out for.
He is, but I think our defence was way more up to that this time around than it was in some of the games last year. I think we were quicker to turn around. Roberts is faster than he looks like he should be. Collins is fast. Hawkins is fast. I think they've brought in some faster guys as well. And so, I think England have observed that tactic, so are a bit better, because you can use your bigger guys to kind of block off the running lanes, can't you? Kind of a bit more legitimately than when you see someone go and barge someone off the ball in the running game. You can kind of be a bit cute with the fact that a chair takes up more space.
Well, it just naturally does, doesn't it? Yeah, exactly. So just through sheer,
relative to the width, the person versus the width of a running game pitch versus the person in the chair versus the width of a wheelchair game pitch, you can block people off sort of more legitimately looking, can't you?
Yeah, but particularly if you're a defensive line of 5, it's 5, isn't it? So, but yeah, even defending it better, they still got through a couple of times, didn't they? So it's something that needs to be looked at. But yeah, the tactics early on were very odd. Taking a penalty straight away. I mean, they missed it, but I don't quite understand the tactics that the French were playing. I don't know whether it was like a situational thing or like we're practicing drop goals in situations. I don't know. It felt a bit.
I don't know. I've seen it before in wheelchair games where people will take penalties and drop goals early on, and you're kind of thinking, normally when I look at a scoreboard at the end of these,
it's like 60 70
odd, 70 odd. You know, we've seen games end up like to both sides in the 70s. Basketball scores.
Yeah, it does. I mean, obviously, I'm not a connoisseur of it. I haven't seen enough of it to kind of say it, but it just felt slightly weird, I would say. But yeah, as a match, fantastic spectacle. It always is. I am so looking forward to my games that I'm going to see in the autumn.
Yeah, me too. And I'm sure there'll be more people who'll pick up some tickets to the wheelchair game. Certainly the wheelchair final in Manchester and Manchester Central, that's going to be out now, isn't it? Because originally it was going to be at Liverpool when the tournament was last year, but now it's at Manchester Central. I'm hoping that this international will have certainly helped boost the potential crowd for that match in
I would hope so.
November. Okay. A couple of other internationals to catch up on. Wales women 60, Italy women 0. So well done to the Welsh women there. They bounced back from their defeat to England. Obviously a slightly lower calibre of opposition, but good to see them getting some games there. And then France men 34, Wales men 10. A couple of fan views on this one. Do you want to do the first?
Yes. So Alan Walker says the Tramontana blew so hard, the cameras wobbled, the post wobbled, the head blew off the beer as the host stood firm against an underpowered Welsh side who missed Dudson in the middles. All 4 wingers hardly got a touch because Les Cantilliers went through the motions and through the Wales middles. Wales scored at the start of the second, so France pulled away again. Even if Scarre looked good, Dragons 34, Dragons 10. Proper international rugby league.
And EFC 78G said, Wales got absolutely unlucky with the result today. France were all over the place today, scoring try after try until Wales got their very own and brought the game back to them. But they